I'm sitting with Mrs. Lars Gren, otherwise known as Elisabeth Elliot, and she's a famous Christian author of many books and a very intelligent and respectable public speaker. She is here for Wheaton College's spring semester special services, and she is speaking on living in company with Christ. And we would like to know what has made Elisabeth Elliot looked up to and respected to become the author and speaker that she is today. Could you give us a little insight on that?
Well, Andy, that's a tough question for me. What has made me looked up to? I just feel that I'm very privileged at having been a part of a story that the world knew about way back in 1956. And it was through that a publisher asked me if I would write a book. I had no idea of ever writing books. I was going to be a jungle missionary for the rest of my life, as far as I knew. And so this job was, as it were, dropped in my lap. And one book follows another, and for some reason, when you write books, people have the idea that you can speak. So I've been invited to speak, and one thing has led to another. So
You've been a very appreciated speaker, too.
far from being a jungle missionary all my life, I've had a very different course
Yes,
than I
guess
expected.
so. You and Jim Elliot both went to Wheaton College, and I guess everybody's kind of interested in what life at Wheaton College was like, and what attracted you most to Jim Elliot when you saw him and met him and that type of thing. What was your life like at this point?
Well, probably in many ways just exactly like a student today, but in many ways it was different. Of course, it was much smaller. The dining hall was part of the original Williston. There wasn't any addition on the back of that. I was just talking with Dr. Kello today, and he was telling me that you only have chapel 3 days a week normally, and you get 9 cuts. Well, we had chapel 5 days a week, and we had 3 cuts per semester. So there were things which were much more rigorous, and when I go into the dining hall, I can't believe my eyes at the variety. We got 3 items for breakfast, 4 for lunch, and 5 for supper, which meant that at supper, if you had meat, potatoes, and vegetables, and a glass of milk, and a salad, you couldn't have any dessert. That's 5 items. We got seconds on potatoes and milk, nothing else. There was no choice of entrees. It was fish one day, and it was maybe meatloaf another day, and no extras, and certainly no ice cream and no soft drinks.
Wow.
And breakfast, 3 items meant coffee, toast, and 1 egg, or toast and an egg and a glass of juice. And what attracted me to Jim Elliot? Well, I would say everything. He was, for one thing, mysterious to us girls, because being so handsome and so popular and never dating anybody, we were mystified. We found out, of course, that he had a very high and serious purpose, and he thought that women might be a distraction to that, so he wanted to keep his mind on his studies as long as he was a student. He was an athlete, a champion wrestler, a campus clown, a leader in the class, a president of the Foreign Missions Fellowship, and in what were called honors convocations in those days. I don't know if you have such things nowadays, do you? We had an honors convocation every semester when the names of all the honors students were read out, and Jim's name was always read out in the honors convocations.
Wow.
And he graduated with highest honor in classical Greek. So it was an unusual combination, an athlete and a clown and a spiritual leader and also a scholar. All of those things attracted me. But I think most importantly, I was attracted by his personal discipline and his spiritual frame of mind.
That's great. Now, when you two went over to be missionaries, I know that there was a language that you weren't really familiar with at all. How did you come to grasp that challenge and get over that little hump? What did you do to deal with learning the language and getting to know a culture that was really unknown?
I had to learn the national language of Ecuador first, of course, which is Spanish, and that was not so difficult because you could get teachers and textbooks. But the next challenge was much greater, which was to go to the western jungle and begin working on a language which had never been written down, the Colorado language. And I had been trained at the University of Oklahoma in linguistics, so I had an idea how you go about approaching an unwritten language. Basically, you get people to repeat sentences, and you try to imitate them, and then you try to write them down phonetically, and then you go on from a phonetic alphabet to a phonemic alphabet, and you develop the morphology and the syntax and all of that sort of thing. And that kind of work I did with 3 different languages. I married Jim Elliot and began working with him on Quechua, and then later, after he was killed, I went to the people that had killed him and began reducing the Auca language to writing.
That's a really amazing situation that you were in when you went to the Auca Indians. What inspired you to do that?
It seemed to be the next thing that God was asking me to do. I didn't really expect that God would send a widow with a baby into a place where 5 men had lost their lives, but God has a lot of surprises up his sleeve, and in a very remarkable way, which is much too long to tell today. I was in the right place at the right time, and I was able to make contact with 2 Auca women, and so my daughter and I ended up going in there to live with them, along with Rachel Saint, the sister of the pilot who had been killed as well.
When Jim Elliot made plans to actually land in the Auca tribe, as opposed to just dropping things, how did you, as his wife and as a woman, handle this decision that your husband made? Were you scared?
Well, I should correct, it wasn't Jim Elliot that made plans to fly in there, because he was not a flyer, but it was Nate Saint who thought of dropping gifts to the people by way of reducing their hostility to outsiders, with the hope that they would then be able to go in and meet them face to face, having already convinced them that they were friendly. But the original plan was that Jim and I and our baby, Valerie, who was 10 months old at the time, would go into Auca territory by dugout canoe. This was before Nate Saint discovered a sand strip on the Korodai River where he thought he could land his plane. So I was thrilled with this idea, because I knew the dangers, and I thought, if my husband is going to be killed, I would just as soon be killed along with him. I couldn't face the possibility of being left a widow.
Right.
So I was quite devastated when I found out that Plan A had been scratched, and Plan B was that 5 men would go in by plane, 1 at a time, and set up a camp and attempt to reach the people, the Aucas, that way. And of course it was Plan B that was implemented, and a couple of years later, when I went to live with the Aucas and learned their language and asked them about why they killed the men, and they told me it was because they thought they were cannibals, I said to them, if my husband and I had come in here by canoe with our baby, would you have killed us? And they said, of course not.
Oh my.
Because no man who has hostile intentions is going to take his wife and baby.
That's an amazing story. Now, you've brought so much inspiration to Wheaton College. The message right now that you're speaking on, living in company with Christ, could you tell us a little bit about what you mean by that quote or that statement?
It comes from 1 Corinthians 5:10, which is one of the clear statements in the New Testament as to why Jesus died. It said Jesus died for us so that awake or asleep we might live in company with him. Now, we couldn't have lived in company with him as long as we were living in our sin. And so he had to die to save us from our sins, and in order to qualify us to live holy lives, which are the only kind of lives that could be in harmony with his. So it's my earnest desire always to help people to see that every minute of life is meant to be an offering to God. Everything that I do, whether it's studies or kitchen work or writing a book or making a talk or doing a radio program or standing on the street corner and giving out a tract or witnessing to somebody in a prison or ironing my husband's shirts, I don't think it makes any difference to God what I'm doing, as long as that is the thing that God wants me to do at that particular moment. I don't think God is more interested in my writing a book than he is in my peeling an onion. He wants me to write the book when it's time to write the book and peel the onion when it's time to peel the onion. The point is, I live in company with Christ. Does that make sense?
Oh, definitely. Most definitely. Also, I know that you've said that that the struggle with finding time, as any American would know, is just so difficult. Finding time to use our time wisely for God and make an impact on others' lives, and finding time for devotions and that type of thing. Is there something that you could leave us, a suggestion in some way on how to plan for the time that we want?
Well, we don't find time. God has given us all 24 hours a day, exactly the same amount of time. The great question is how we allot the time.
Mm.
And ask any college student, can you find the time to go to the football game? If that college student wants to go to that football game, he finds the time.
Yeah.
And that is a dead giveaway. We find time, we make time to do what we really want to do. And so my challenge to the students is, how much does it matter to you to get to know Jesus Christ? Does it matter enough to sacrifice something else, which might even be the football game, in order to have that time with Christ? If you can do it all, great. But most of us would be very unrealistic to think we can do it all. We've got to say yes to this and no to a whole lot of other things.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.